it's a pleasure to be here standing in front of you today. If there's one thing among others I love about IBM, it's how they allow me to make my, what I say, gay job, my day job. In my work, we leverage IBM's best practices on diversity and inclusion to build and create client relationships and make an impact to the world. So today, I'd like to share with you how IBM Philippines has been leading through inclusion and leave some bits of practical knowledge on how everyone else can go to the same path. IBM has had a long history when it comes to diversity and inclusion. Before it even became popular, in 1953, then IBM CEO Thomas Watson Jr. signed the first corporate equality opportunity letter, the first in the US, which states, "It is the policy of this organization to hire regardless of race, color, or creed," eventually adding sexual orientation, gender identity, expression, and genetic makeup to that policy. And what we really learned in terms of continuing this progress was understanding the power of DEI. Most will call this the business case, and while we want the world to move away from D&I making business sense as our justification for what we want to accomplish, the world is just not there yet, at least on this side of the world. Inclusion allows us to be the very best version of us, and it contributes to the business. Brands with high diversity scores shown to have been preferred by customers 83% of the time. It increases revenue from innovation, positively impacts employee retention by more than double, which reduces the cost for attrition, and the list goes on. Yet, most importantly, the best employee experience incorporates inclusion into the mix, and fulfilled employees make satisfied clients, no doubt. The conversation continues in terms of the business case and the opportunity cost of not being inclusive, because while diversity is a fact due to differences in identities and background employees have, inclusion is the action to enable an organization to have people of diverse backgrounds belong. Because in neuroscience, exclusion is said to be as painful as physical pain. Can you imagine potentially while your colleague may not be physically in pain, their brain activity is reacting similarly when they feel excluded? And so this is why, as we shared on IBM's 2020 Diversity and Inclusion Report, which is available to everyone, easily Googleable, we are channeling everything we have been learning into outcome-oriented strategic areas, which include allyship, or making every IBMer an upstander through inclusive behavior, advocacy, inclusive employee experience, and of course, accountability. Our senior leaders are held accountable by use of our D&I Optimizer, an analytical tool that harnesses data and creates transparency within organizations, ensuring targets are clear for our leaders and that these contribute to their annual performance appraisals. All IBMers are expected to be allies. Be Equal Allyship, for example, is our endeavor to expand, enable, and ensure equality for everyone. This program, associated with the skill badge, requires practical experience to earn it and entails joining at least 2 communities to demonstrate a holistic sense of allyship. One must have the experience of being an ally to be called Be Equal Ally. When it comes to inclusion, it is important to set the stage. And IBM's best practice around this revolve around harnessing diversity of thought by listening to each IBMer. I couldn't highlight more how the last year and a half have been difficult for all of us. With IBM's experience in remote work globally, it has been relatively less challenging transition operationally to work from home, but this major shift had a huge impact on the employees' experiences. So one of the first things IBM did was design a work from home pledge. Through the power of the employee voice, a group of IBMers developed the pledge virtually to ensure that the company addressed the extenuating circumstances emerging from this pandemic. As you can see from this pledge, certain themes resonate strongly, like empathy, flexibility, respect, communication, and emotional wellness. It's a visual representations leaders need to promote during a crisis, as each of us respond differently to this pandemic. In addition, shortly after, our CEO announced the development of the Embrace Pledge as a way to actively demonstrate our support for the Black community, which was much needed at that time. And what demonstrates the power of IBM Voice best is this series of jams that IBM has hosted through the Innovation Jam platform. Last January, IBM held a Women's Leadership Innovation Jam, inviting everyone, as in everyone, even outside IBM, around the world, and identified 6 call to actions companies must pursue to advance gender equality in the workplace. These were chat conversations happening digitally, where our VPs were talking to practitioners and anybody from different backgrounds. And those 6 call to actions included: first, help women maintain work-life balance to help them with their careers. Second, we have to understand the impact of gender bias. Third, we must empower women of color. Fourth, train men to be allies. Fifth, use technology to reduce discrimination. And lastly, make STEM careers more accessible and inclusive. And the Global LGBT Plus Jam also happened, and it contributed to a research entitled Striving for Authenticity, which is available to everyone, where it also provided 4 practical steps organizations should be taking. Leadership is an essential part in leading through a crisis, and during this time, it is extremely important to be inclusive leaders. IBM's Be Equal page will highlight steps to be an inclusive leader, but key things that we have to make sure we are providing to our employees during this time are equal access to technology for all, which also means equitable virtual meetings. We had to make sure that our digital platforms like WebEx, Mural, Slack, and the like are accessible to our PWD and neurodiverse employees. We had to make sure that we activated features that they needed that weren't there before. Proactively applying conscious inclusion on top of mitigating unconscious bias, and exhibiting compassion in all circumstances, most importantly, recognizing everyone through inclusive language in day-to-day interactions. As leaders, I urge all of us to examine if our pandemic responses cover these too. And how do these really translate into programs and policies for us in the country? A lot of ways, but some notable ones include DEI pioneering programs from years for IBM, which include milk delivery service for new mothers, tech re-entry, which recognizes gaps in resumes aren't necessarily bad, equal benefits for LGBT plus partners, gender affirmation treatment coverage, therapy for PWD dependents, and various community interventions like PTech mentoring, Girls Who Code, Computer Eyes, and more. The employees of IBM represent a talented, diverse workforce, and achieving the full potential of this diversity is a business priority that is fundamental to our competitive success. And I urge all of us to start our own ally ventures, educate ourselves, speak up, upstand, and ask, what can your level of influence do to make your workplace more inclusive? Thank you very much.